Who to buy and who to sell. Week 2. Fantasy football can be a lot like the stock market. You want to sell players when they're doing really well if you don't think it's going to continue. And you want to buy players when their value goes down. So sell high and buy low. Something you need to know about fantasy football is week 1 weighs a lot on people. Something about waiting all this time for football to come back, if a player crushes them, it hits different. It just feels different. If this player would have had a bad game after week 8, these people probably would be fine. But because it happened in week 1, there's still some unknowns, new players on teams, new coaches, changing offensive scheme. There's a lot of different factors that could have caused this player that they know to be good is now not looking as good. And sometimes people panic. So we're gonna capitalize on that. Just to be clear, these players I'm about to go over are great players. You should not be trading them because their value is low. You want to buy them because their value is low. And you want to preferably use players that have outperformed their expectation because the odds that players that outperform their expectation continue to outperform their expectation is very low. But the odds that somebody that underperformed expectation that normally is elite, they tend to get back to the norm. And week 1 is the time to pounce on that. Quarterbacks to buy after a bad week 1. Joe Burrow. He only had 3 fantasy points. He's an elite quarterback. He'll bounce back. Lamar Jackson also had an ugly game. 8 fantasy points. He had an interception, no touchdowns, only threw for 169 yards. Finished as quarterback 27. This will not continue. And last but not least, Josh Allen, who on primetime TV threw 3 interceptions and only had 1 touchdown for 12 fantasy points. All of these players are elite. They will be fantastic this year. But they all got a little bit of question marks. Josh Allen has a turnover issue. Doesn't matter for fantasy, but you can sell that. As does Lamar Jackson. Plus, people are probably still worried about him staying healthy. He's only played 12 games in the last 2 years. He'll be fine, but this is a selling point too. Joe Burrow's coming off a calf strain. It may take him a while to get back. Don't worry about it. He will be just fine. He's Joe Burrow. He's an elite quarterback. Mike, there's no way these people will sell him to me. Probably not. But there's a chance that they will if you entice them with the right thing. So how about Tua Tagovailoa? He had 466 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was quarterback 1 last week. You telling me that Tua plus a piece couldn't even get the conversation started? Maybe not, but maybe. How about Anthony Richardson? You probably drafted him as a quarterback 2, yet he finished at quarterback 4 last week. You don't think you could pair him with a low-end wide receiver 2 and possibly get a quarterback? All of these are possibly not, but you'll never know if you don't try. Wide receivers to buy low. Davante Adams. He is an elite wide receiver. He only had 13 fantasy points, 6 receptions for 66 yards, 9 targets. Jacoby Myers dominated the targets in this game, but Davante Adams is clearly that dude. How about T. Higgins? 8 targets. I use targets loosely because those targets were awful. They were nowhere close to him. They really shouldn't even be called targets. But he had zeros. People are upset this week. Well, maybe you could buy low on him. Mike, there's no way that anybody would trade Davante Adams after week 1. Yeah, maybe. Maybe not. What if you sent him Brandon Ayuk and a wide receiver 2 for Davante Adams? Or running back if they need a running back. You could package Brandon Ayuk and a Romeo Doubs. He had 2 touchdowns last week. He's clearly going to be involved. Throw both of those together. Send him to the Davante Adams manager. What's the worst that could happen? I'm not asking you to send disrespectful trades. But if you see an opportunity to jump a tier because people may be down on a player, you should probably at least look into it. Just to be clear, I'm not trading Tua Tagovailoa, Anthony Richardson, and Brandon Ayuk for just anybody. I think that these are good players and I think that they will be good throughout the year. But if there is an opportunity to upgrade to a more stable and reliable player, such as the ones I've listed, I think that it's worth doing. It's not that I think that the people that we're selling are bad. It's just that the odds that Tua stays at this elite level and the odds that Lamar Jackson stays at this low level are just not the same. And it's the same thing with Davante Adams versus Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk had a fantastic week and he looks great. But if you give me the option of Brandon Ayuk and Davante Adams, give me Davante Adams all day, every day, because we've seen it for the last decade. So I just wanted to make that clear. We're not just giving away Brandon Ayuk and Tua. and Anthony Richardson. We're not giving them away. We're upgrading if possible. Running backs to buy low before week 2. Josh Jacobs only had 48 rushing yards, 2 receptions, 9 fantasy points. This dude is an incredible running back. He was going up against Denver, who are a great defense across the board. Of course he wasn't going to have a good game, but this is a contract year for him. He's going to bounce back. I think that he's a good buy. The New York Giants got shut out on national TV. Everybody was watching this game. And Saquon only had 51 yards. He did catch the ball 3 times, which was fine, but his fantasy output in PPR was only 9 points. If anybody is nervous at all about Saquon, go get him. He's still elite. Jahmyr Gibbs had a terrible first game from a fantasy point standpoint, but if you watch the game, he looks explosive. They may not be giving him a majority of the touches, but he's definitely worth going to grab. James Cook is a good buy low. People haven't been huge on him anyways, so you might actually be able to get him for a little bit cheaper, but he only had 10 fantasy points, and I see his opportunity increasing over time. I definitely think he's a good grab. Joe Mixon also only had 10 fantasy points, but the Cincinnati Bengals were playing a division rival on the road in a rainy game. Didn't get as much work as I think he will moving forward, but I love the 5 targets. He's a nice guy to go get too. Tight ends I'm trading for before week 2. George Kittle, if the price is good enough. I don't think George Kittle was worth his draft value, but if you could get him 50 cents on the dollar because he only had 5 fantasy points in week 1, I think that that's worth it. Now, if you're going to pay top tier for George Kittle, I'm not really a fan, but if you can get him at like half price, I think that he's worth a grab. This isn't an empty the bank kind of situation. This is a see how the manager feels about him, and if he feels okay, then grab him. I still think Darren Waller is going to have a good year. I am slightly concerned about his hamstring, so again, I would not pay up too much for him, but I do think that while he's healthy, he's going to be a main contributor in this offense. So Darren Waller is a nice trade target, but don't give up too much, especially because it sounds like he's going to have a hamstring situation for the rest of the year. But if the manager's nervous and they're selling him for cheap, I think that for these two, the Kittle and Waller, I think the play is to trade them a player you won't be using. Yeah. I don't know if I'd touch my starting lineup for these, but if you happen to have a bench player that blew up and you could combine 2 of those to send over for a tight end, I do think that they will be elite, but they'll be more up and down, so I don't want to hurt my actual roster to get them. The rest of the people I've talked about, I actually like them season long and I'm not as concerned, but these 2 tight ends have been a little up and down, so I'm not trying to spend too much. But again, this is buying low. You want to sell high and buy low. Let me know if you have any questions. Are there any topics you want me to go over? I can make some videos on them. For more things that'll help you in your fantasy football league, click here.